Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down. Morrow slammed it home. Garland upstairs. Oh! Sexton inside. A thunderous and Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowland. Support for this podcast is brought to you by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live TV and sports for half the cost of cable. There's no contract and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. We got a great podcast for you guys today, and joining me is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good, man. Had a long work day. I was actually in the office today, so we're moving. We're scrambling. We had a long work day. Went home, got Millie to bed. Now podcasting with you lovely gentlemen, and I'll eat dinner later.
We appreciate your sacrifices as always, Carter. Way to make this about yourself. But you know,
always do, Justin, one way or another.
I'm excited. We got a great guest making his return to the podcast. You know him from about 30 different outlets, but it is Brad Rowland from Uproxx, Locked on Hawks, and the Sports Line. Brad, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm well. Thanks for having me, fellas. I appreciate the invite back. We're here. It's August and raring to go on a Tuesday.
It's funny. We were talking about, but before we went live, how the last time we had you on the podcast was 2 seasons ago. The Cavs and Hawks both got off to like decent starts. They were in the play-in mix. The whole concept of the podcast was, hey, the Hawks are like a year ahead of the Cavs, but this is a great example of how growth isn't linear. This young team didn't take the big step forward that we were projecting. Of course, the Hawks went on to make a Eastern Conference Finals run that year. And since then, the Cavs have made kind of their own leap, a leap that was cut short a little bit by injuries and then cut short by your damn Hawks, Brad. So we are now podcasting with the enemy and continuing our getting to know our potential rivals series.
Yeah, my apologies on that, I suppose, on this side of things. I know how it all works, and the growth not being linear thing is very familiar in Atlanta as well, I promise you.
Well, you know, we just... reality is destiny meant that the Cavs needed to have Ochai Agbaji for them to take this next run. So missing out on the playoffs, getting Ochai, we're going to be good. Everything's going to be cooking. Everything's going to be humming along. But I want to start this off by getting your opinion on kind of how you break down the playoff tiers in the Eastern Conference. So you can either just keep it to tiers or do rankings within the tiers, whatever works best for you. But I just kind of want to get your lay of the land of where the Cavs and Hawks fall in the Eastern Conference.
Especially with all this movement and non-movement.
Yeah, move and not move is a good way to put it. No, I think that most groupings have these two teams pretty close together in some form. You can certainly kind of choose your own adventure within tiers. But I think for me, there's one team I still have a lot of trouble with, and we'll get to them, I suppose. I think it's still like pretty much a 4-team top tier of Boston, Milwaukee, Miami, and Philadelphia in some order. And then you get into like where Brooklyn goes. I have no idea. I guess if you assume Kevin Durant is there and healthy, and as is Kyrie, they're probably in that top tier. But I mean, I'm sure you guys have done this too the last few months. Like, I just keep assuming that Brooklyn's just kind of to the side somewhere until we see them play basketball. I don't know how that works really.
I've done a lot of that. Yeah. I've absolutely done. I've flat out just avoided putting them in tiers, and now
we have to again. We can't avoid it any longer.
Yeah, I kind of just slapped them into tier 2 and acknowledged the fact that their ceiling and floor could be anywhere in the Eastern Conference.
Again, their floor was 44 wins last year. That's in a nightmare year. They're tier 1, and you're crazy if you don't have them there, if the guys are healthy.
You heard that, Justin. You're crazy. I think you just heard that.
It's not the first time I've heard it either.
And then you get into like how big your next tier is. Kind of depends on how you view this. I think that for the most part, it's some combination of Toronto, maybe at the top of that tier for after last season. You know, Toronto had the best year, 48 wins a year ago. Then you get into Atlanta, Cleveland, and maybe Chicago in that tier. I think that I'm more prone to having Chicago in the tier below this, which is a little bit controversial, I think, in some circles.
That is controversial.
I'm just a little bit lower on the Bulls in general. Like, the Bulls got outscored last year for the season. I know they had some injury stuff, but they had a negative point differential for the year. I think they were pretty fortunate to get like the all-time DeRozan season and all that stuff too. So I think it's those teams teams, and you can kind of pick and choose on a couple of them, like which tier Brooklyn's in, which tier Chicago's in. But the two teams that we cover, I think, are in the same tier, and I'm not sure how to order them at this point in time, and maybe we can argue about that.
Yeah. Do you have Toronto in their kind of own tier on tier 2, or do you lump them with the big group?
I think they're closer to Atlanta and Cleveland for me, only because of the depth issues. Like, I think if you assumed Toronto was healthy, then you could argue that maybe they're a tier above. But the Hawks, just got Dejounte Murray. We'll get into that too, and maybe they're in that tier as well. But it still scares me that Toronto seems to only just play 7 guys forever. And like they kind of had a really fortunate season last year that they had kind of very little injuries, and we all root for that. We don't want injuries to happen, but they kind of can't afford many injuries. And maybe the X factor there to swing that is Scotty Barnes being a year better. But the depth just kind of still scares me for whatever reason. They're good.
I think that's absolutely fair. I did want to drill onto the Bulls point a little bit, because you're right. I mean, I wonder how many teams in the history of the league have finished 10 games over 500 in a season where they're outscored for the year. It's got to be a small group. And like,
it's like the inverse of the Kevin Love Timberwolves, where that team just had the best net rating and they missed the playoffs. Kevin Love has missed the playoffs on some pretty good teams between last year's Cavs and that final year in Minnesota.
Also missed him on some bad teams. He's had a weird career.
That's all accurate. No, the Hawks had a team like that, actually. It was the Dwight Howard Hawks team. I'm not sure if you guys remember.
The legendary. Who could forget?
They made the playoffs that year, and that was a torturous experience overall, but they were a negative point differential team, so I'm kind of sensitive to those kind of teams. And look, you can say Chicago had injuries late, and that's fair. It's kind of like what happened to Cleveland, and it's always kind of similar. Like, the injuries were clearly part of the decline in the second half of the season, but with Lonzo Ball kind of still being a giant question mark health-wise, and again, like, DeRozan was incredible. He was better than we all thought he was going to be, I think, last year, but can he do that whole thing again? Because without him being kind of a hero, they don't win 46 games last year.
Yeah, I mean, what was it, like 4 game winners that he hit? That's the type of stuff that even if you miss 2 more of those, you're possibly in the play-in game against Brooklyn, right? Depending on tiebreakers and all that. So I'm with you in Chicago. I'd still put them in the same tier, but I kind of have them towards the bottom. And I agree with your assessment as well. Like, I know Toronto did have guys kind of miss some time, but relative to the rest of the Eastern Conference, they were one of the healthiest teams in the East. I think Boston was the only one that was healthier than them. So just the lack of depth and the fact that they're playing some guys that already have pretty heavy like minutes on their bodies for their careers, playing those guys like 40 minutes a night. I just don't know how sustainable that is. Although they do have Bo Cruz, so now that might turn the tides.
That is the ultimate game changer. I do want to talk about the team you cover, Brad, the Hawks, because something that's really been rattling around my brain in the wake of the Dejounte Murray. Part of me wonders, are we swinging a little too low on this team? After they had this magical conference finals run, but not a crazy regular season. I think they had like a +2 point differential, a little bit better than that. And then Capella doesn't play, seems like he loses a little bit off the top last year. Obviously, Collins misses a huge percentage of the season. DeAndre Hunter misses a huge percentage of the season. And like, are we too low on them as like a legit, like, are they closer to tier 1 than we think? Because like, if I'm a Hawks fan and I'm an optimistic Hawks fan, I'm almost like a little grumpy that I'm in this tier with the Cavs and with the Bulls. Because like, hey, we've made a conference finals run. We just had a weird year last year.
No, I think that's a reasonable point. And listen, Hawks fans are certainly thinking they're closer to tier 1 than they are to tier 2 at this point. And I totally get it, because on one hand, you could look at this team like, all right, this is the bones of a team, like you mentioned, went to the conference finals 2 years ago. And last year, it wasn't a complete disaster season, but there was a lot that went wrong a year ago for Atlanta to have them be what they were. And even then, they kind of still recovered. They made the playoffs, all that stuff. And you add Dejounte Murray on there. And if you just say, look, you're adding Murray to this team, and at the price of just basically Gallinari for present day circumstances, obviously they paid a lot in picks, but in terms of the current roster, that was the swap. You could say, look, that's a heck of an upgrade, and maybe this is an underrated team as a result. And honestly, if things go well and they have good health and all that stuff, I could totally see them being in that top tier, winning 50 games. Like that would not surprise me at all. And that's on the table, I think. For me, it's like trying to push back just kind of gently at the optimism, because I agree, they're better than they've ever been. This is the best roster they've had in the the Trae Young era in my mind. Now, does that mean they're going to make the conference finals again? The money's probably on no, but this is still the best roster they've had in terms of just overall talent. The problem is they have a lot less depth than they have previously. That's going to be a question mark, if nothing else. And they also have less shooting than they used to have, which is not going to be like a death knell. They still have plenty on paper, but they kind of built their whole team around Trae Young plus shooting plus a roll man, and now they have a lot less shooting. And the talent upgrade maybe just overrides that, and we'll see. But like if you get injuries along the way, like Bogdanovich is already banged up coming out of sort of a lost summer, and they really need him. DeAndre Hunter is a big question mark, a former top 5 pick. I know you guys probably scouted very closely like I did back in the draft. It's just a really interesting team. But yeah, to your point, I think that if you want to see the optimism in this team, there's a lot of it, because if you sort of assume that high baseline and throw Murray on top of it, that's a heck of a place to start with.
I think it's really nice that you thought we scouted someone really well. That's not our brand at all, Brad.
Come on.
No, but I was high on him coming into the draft, and I was pretty convinced he was actually going to be a member of the Cavs. I didn't expect Garland to fall to 5 and for Hunter to go ahead of them. But I think if you're a fan of the Hawks, Cavs, Raptors, I wouldn't say Bulls, but I would say at least of those 3 teams, I think it's not that hard to envision a path to home court in the playoffs, just because a lot of those teams, like I think Boston and Milwaukee are firmly top 2, and I'd almost put them in a like half tier above Philadelphia and Miami. But like Philadelphia and Miami, you got health questions consistently.
Age questions.
Like you got age questions, and neither of those teams are just so overwhelmingly good on paper that you're like, okay, this is just going to work out. This team is going to sail through the regular season and clinch home court.
Boston's the only team in the East that had a +5 point differential or better.
I was going to say, Milwaukee, I think we all agree Milwaukee's a title contender, but isn't there a scenario where they kind of just chill in the regular season?
They might.
Like they don't have a lot of reason to really push super hard. And unlike Boston, who has like incredible depth, if Milwaukee has an injury or something, like they'll still be good, but like, would it shock you if they were the 5 seed because they just kind of pedaled off a little bit? It wouldn't stun me, even though they're better than that in terms of like actual team quality. But if you get Giannis rolls an ankle, or you miss Drew for 2 weeks or something like that, and they kind of just chill, that wouldn't stun me at all. And
Miami thinks, hey, we can earn home court in game 1 of any playoff series and we'll be fine, right? Like it's not a big deal for them if they want to manage the health of everybody on their roster. So there are a lot of avenues for this to work out. But when I look at the tiers, I kind of think of it as like my confidence in these teams come playoffs. But when it comes to earning home court, I think it's actually going to be really competitive in a pretty open field. But I do want to launch into my first big question about the Hawks as we get to know you guys a little bit better. And the question is, the biggest move that you guys made, the Dejounte Murray trade. I'd like to kind of get your overall thoughts on the addition of Dejounte Murray and how that fit is going to work out with Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious headline is they added an all-star. That's clearly what you want to say if you're the Hawks. There's a question about like if he's actually an all-star. He was injury replacement, all that stuff. But listen, he's a really good player. Like whether it's top 30, top 40, however you want to say that, he's a really, really good player. And the big thing is that I've been broken record on this, but the Hawks went into the offseason saying to anyone who would listen, on the record, off the record, anywhere, that they wanted to get better at the point of attack defensively, and they wanted to bring in another ball handler creator next to Trae. And they did it all. They did it all at once. I mean, that was the thing. I don't think anybody had Murray as the most likely guy for them to go get, because I'm not sure we all knew he was going to be available at that point in time. Like that was kind of the surprise that he was available. Once it got linked and he was available, it was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And it isn't an absolutely perfect offensive fit. We can probably get into that if you want to, but I think on paper, he does what they wanted some player to do from the outside of the organization, like take the pressure off Trae, crucially run the offense when Trae's off the floor. That's been a huge point of contention around Trae for the last 3 years. Basically, anytime he leaves the floor, the offense craters almost always. And plus that, and Murray's got enough size to play next to him defensively. He's a really good defender at the point of attack. There's lots and lots of positives. And again, the future-facing concerns of giving up a bunch of picks, like they probably overpaid by a little bit in terms of that trade, the actual value. You can definitely tell who cares about value and who doesn't by how they talk about this trade with Murray. Because I think you could certainly argue that the Hawks should have done anyway, and I'm actually kind of on that side of things. But both can be true. You could say, look, the Hawks paid a premium for Dejounte Murray in terms of just actual trade return, but also they only gave up Gallinari, who was a guy who was going to leave anyway. They were not going to bring Gallo back at the number that he was going to be making. So again, like he checks so many boxes for them. That's the sales pitch, and just being another high-end talent, because they've been looking for the number 2, both either in the backcourt or somewhere else next to Trae for a long time. And this is the first time in the Trae Young era that they have a player that they can look themselves in the eye and say, this guy could be an all-star this year. Like maybe you could say about John Collins, who I actually quite like, but he was always a little bit below that. Clint Capella 2 years ago was almost on the precipice of that, but not quite there. Murray is a legitimate, quote unquote star, and they just haven't had that guy.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question as a pretty big Dejounte Murray fan, because you listen to some of the detractors who I try to listen to change, see if they can change my opinion on stuff. And there is some skepticism like, hey, like, yeah, he can run the offense, but it's not like the Spurs offense has been that good under Dejounte Murray. Like, yeah, the counting stats are there, but, you're not seeing like crazy leaps in their offensive rating when he's on the floor and has the keys. Do you think that there's a kind of a world in which like the theory, the reality doesn't work as well as the theory in terms of Trae off the floor?
I could sort of see that in terms of the argument. My counter would be, yes, that it's fair to say that he's not like an offense unto himself like some guys are who are on that level. But when you're talking about a second unit, like what second unit is led by Dejounte Murray around the league?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And they also have plenty.
This is my take, by the way.
Yeah, they have plenty of supporting talent. Like, look, I like Murray quite a bit. I think he's going to help the Hawks a lot. It's also in my mind like he's not a number 1. And in Atlanta, he's not number 1. It's kind of a great situation for him. Just that's a very simple explanation. Obviously, there's more depth to it than that. But if he's your best player, if he's your best creator, you're probably in some trouble, big picture offensively. But if he's your number 2 in a good system against one of the best offensive players in the league in Trae Young, like that's a pretty good setup. And really, Trae's going to play 34 minutes a night, 35 minutes a night, which means you're only getting 12 to 14 minutes a game of the Dejounte Murray number 1 option, and it's coming in against second units a lot of the time. That's perfectly fine for me.
With some really interesting players, supplementary pieces on the floor likely. I mean, Bojan can be on the floor. Okongwu might be on the floor in some of those lineups.
Do I love Okongwu?
We were big Okongwu fans.
I remember that.
Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense that I do agree that he should more than lift those units. What do you think about him off ball next to Trae?
Yeah, that's really the question as to how it works. Like when they're both on the floor, I think when one of them's on the floor, it's very easy. You just kind of heliocentric. Murray's not quite as good at that as Trae is, but he's really good at it. When they're playing together is more of the question, because there's this very convenient narrative that I've heard out there. Like you just move Trae Young off the ball. Like there's even discussions like, is Trae Young going to be playing shooting guard now? I'm like, no, Trae Young is a point guard.
Savant.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what I'm about to say is that, look, yes, you could say that Trae is currently he's a much better shooter, and that's a very natural thing if you want to keep Murray on the ball, Trae off the ball. But you don't want to take Trae Young off the ball. Like Trae Young is one of the best on-ball creators in the entire NBA. So there's a balance there that they're going to have to find. I think Trae, for the first time in his career, is going to have someone that he trusts enough to be willing to move off the ball. That's the big question for me always with Trae is not the ability, it's the willingness to move off the ball. And I think, and honestly, I kind of defend his viewpoint here. There was nobody good enough to push him off the ball previously. And I think he knew that. You could say that's stubborn or whatever you want to say, but I think it was justifiable. Now, he wanted Murray. They want to play together. I think that's a good thing to sort of buy into. And yeah, I think you'll see a little bit more of Trae off the ball, but Murray off the ball is going to be more of like him going back a few years to San Antonio when he was not the guy 2, 3, 4 years ago. I think he's played enough off the ball in the NBA as a cutter to be effective. He'll find that. But what you don't want to have him do, kind of like you don't want to have Trae off the ball is too much, is to have Murray standing in the corner. Because he's not a good enough shooter to just be a spot up guy. He's going to have to be active, kind of attack closeouts, be an active cutter. And I think going back to the Spurs system, hopefully he still has that in there from 2 or 3 years ago where he wasn't the guy and he was pretty effective at that. So we'll see. He's going to have to relearn it in some ways, but I think maybe it'll take 20 games, 30 games, however long it'll take for them to kind of find their groove. But there's enough overlap and sort of complementary skill sets in there where I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, I am really high on Murray as an off-ball player. Like I think he's a really intelligent cutter, and you do have some smart basketball players on the Hawks. Like there's a lot of basketball IQ there. So I think that's going to work. My question is going to be just how much of an adjustment period is there for Trae when he is playing off-ball? Because, I mean, we could even look at an example with the Cavs last year, like bringing in Ricky Rubio and having Garland play off ball. It took a little bit of time, I would say, like you saw in the first 10 games for Garland to start to get a little more comfortable, and then he became really good at it in the remaining, I guess, 20 games or whatever that they had with Rubio. But there was definitely an adjustment period. I remember some of the conversations early where, hey, you got to stagger these guys. They can't be on the court together. It's not going to work. And then later on in the season, it was, oh my God, like that's the key to the Cavs' success is those two together. Do you think it's going to be a big learning curve for Trey, or do you expect it to be a relatively simple transition just because of how talented both of those guys are?
Yeah, I think it'll be a little bit of a learning curve. Trey himself and people around him are always quick to say, like, look, he didn't always play like this. Like he was not always the guy. And like, you know, you're going back a long way to like EYBL and that kind of stuff where he's playing with Michael Porter and like it's been a long time. But I think he has the skill set to play off the ball. But it is different. Trey has had to carry such a massive workload offensively. That's kind of the only way that he's really had to play or really has played in the NBA is to just be the guy on the ball all the time. And that's the right move. He's so good at it. That's the right play. But I think it's going to take him a little bit of time to figure it out. Like, and it's not necessarily being able to. He has a skill set. His catch and shoot numbers have been incredible so far. That's kind of an underrated aspect of his game so far, is that he has been an awesome catch and shoot player, but it's the movement off the ball for me that I'm looking for. That's my biggest question, is like just having the motor, having the juice to go out and do that. Because like once you run the offense, like that takes a lot of time. It's one of the pet theories that I've had in my life always around the Hawks is like, one of the reasons why Trey is as shaky, let's just say defensively as he is that he uses so much energy on offense. It kind of applies in the same way to being an off-ball player. Like nobody else is Steph Curry and can just run around screens all day long. It's really hard to play off the ball. That's kind of undervalued. I think you guys probably understand that, but like, guys, it's not so easy as to like turn a switch on to go play off the ball and move like a crazy person and like do all these things. I don't think you're going to see a lot of that from Trey. It's going to be just kind of being a little bit more careful, a little bit more direct in what he's doing off the ball, not just standing there. Because as a lot of these on-ball heliocentric guys do, Luka, James Harden, all those guys, they kind of just stand in the corner or stand in the wing when they're not doing that, when they're not involved in the action. Trey's going to have to be a little bit more intentional of like moving just with some intention.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're 100% right. Like, I feel like sometimes that this is that idea that to be a savvy off-ball player, you have to be sprinting around 6 screens and curling. And sometimes it's as simple as relocating 4 feet over in a different direction after someone else has collapsed the defense, because then your man doesn't know where you are on the way back, you know, after they dig. Like, and I think that kind of stuff is where, I mean, and we've seen this, though. Like, it's not like, especially during the Eastern Conference Finals run when Herter was playing really well and Bojan was playing really well. Like, there have been times where he has been an off-ball player, and it's been very painful. It really stinks to have possessions where someone other than Trey initiates and then ends with an open Trey 3. And like that, I very strongly believe this team is going to be very dangerous offensively. What do you think on the defensive end? Because, you know, every time a high volume elite point of attack defending point guard, sometimes their reputation starts to precede them. Do you feel like they can build an elite defense, or at least a pretty good one? Because that was a big part of their conference finals run, was they got stops at a pretty consistent level. And, you know, everyone on Twitter was begging for the other teams to attack Trey, and it just wasn't working. Like, do you think they can get back there with this kind of roster construction?
Yeah, to your point, like in that second half of the season run to the conference finals and the playoffs, they weren't a great defense, but they were average. They were a little bit better than average, like top 12, 13 in the league. And that's really a lot different than where they were last year. I think a season ago, it was very frustrating to watch this. Anytime you have it was a bottom 5 defense on a team that is trying, because you guys know this, like the teams that are at the bottom of the league defensively are usually really bad teams. And the Hawks were not really bad, but they were really bad defensively. They were terrible defensively last year. And I think they didn't need to be like I certainly argued this many times. The personnel was not very good defensively a year ago, but they still should not have been as bad as they were, if that makes sense. If they had come in and been 19th, I would have been like, okay, that's not offensive to me. It's not bothersome to me. But being 26, 27, 28 during the season, like you couldn't be that bad. It was just kind of, it was not necessarily where they needed to be. I think the personnel is better this year. First of all, taking Gallo off the team. I love Gallo. Gallo is quite bad defensively at this point in his career, and turning him into Dejounte Murray, who I agree with your point there as well about like lead guards. I kind of asked around and been watching a lot of film. I think Murray is potentially a touch overrated defensively because he led the league in steals last year, in part. And early in his career, when he was like a defense first stopper, it was the energy on that end of the floor. And you guys, it's like so hard to be the number one on offense and still be an awesome defender as a guard.
Yeah,
I think the pitch is that maybe with a smaller offensive role, he gets back to that. And I actually kind of buy that. I think he could be pretty good defensively.
He's got to choose that. And not a lot of guys who get the taste to stardom want to go back to grinding.
Yeah, that's kind of the question there for sure. And like I've often defended Kevin Huerter's defense. I think he's actually not so bad. I think there's a reputation thing there of him just being a skinny white shooter that he's not so bad defensively. But you turn that into Dejounte Murray and you turn Gallo into, guys like Justin Holiday and maybe Mo Harkless. Like they're better defensively on paper, especially with another year of Okongwu. Capella's back and seemingly healthy. So I say all that, like defensively, can they be really good? Probably not. You still have Trey for 35 minutes a night, and Trey is definitely a negative in terms of impact. I do question just how bad impact wise a point guard can actually be, but he is bad. So it's like this very delicate balance of like how much that affects you, but having him on the floor that much is always going to hurt you. And they have some other weak spots, like Bogdanovich is not great at this point in time. He's definitely slowed down a little bit defensively. So I think the pitch for the Hawks this year is to like hope that they get back to that league average range. And you kind of have to take that. This is still an offense first team. Any team built around Trae Young, it's going to be offense first. But I think they have the personnel to be, the 13th best defense versus the 27th. And if they can do that,
that's quite the leap.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I was projecting, I'd probably go more in like the 17, 18, 19 range. But even that would be a huge jump from last year. And that's kind of all they have to be. To be a really good team, top 5, top 6, top 7 offense, and like top 20 defense, that's a 50-win team probably. Yeah. So that works. That's kind of the recipe, I think.
And we're kind of hoping for the inverse of that, I think, with the inexperience that the Cavs have. Like, they showed that they could have a really, really good defense. And, hey, I mean, the Warriors won with an elite defense and a below-average offense last year for the season. So who knows? Maybe that's a good path. But we've been grilling you long enough. Let's turn the tables for a moment here and give you the opportunity to ask one of your big questions for the Cavs coming into this year.
Okay, so this is an outsider perspective, but given I'll represent my city here, Colin Sexton's from Atlanta. What's happening with Colin Sexton right now? I feel like I've heard multiple podcasts, not yours, recently on this topic.
Wow, just drag us for not listening to us.
I
see how it is, Brad.
I was going to say, I should say this differently. I've heard some national podcasts that kind of just like put Colin Sexton on the roster. Like they're talking about him like he's on the team, and he's not currently under contract with the Cavs, unless I missed something. So I say almost like as a Atlanta spokesman, what's happening with our guy Colin right now?
I think I've heard that as well. I think we've even heard that from like Chris Fedor and some of the guys on the
people
beat
around the team. Okay,
where he's like penciled in, right? And I think one of the biggest things is just the fact that there are currently 15 contracts on the roster where a spot needs to be opened up for Colin Sexton. And I think when you look at the potential movement around the league right now, there might be an opportunity, whether it's directly, like they've been connected to Donovan Mitchell, although that sounds like that's no longer the case, or as a third team there to maybe shed a salary, to open up some space, to create more room below the luxury tax, and kind of advance those negotiations from that point. But for the most part, we're in the dark. It hasn't seemed like a lot of negotiation has gone on in public. I think Carter and I are both assuming that he's going to be back with the Cavs. It's just a matter of, okay, is it on the qualifying offer? Is it on a multi-year deal? And if so, how many years, and what are there any player options?
Yeah, it stands to reason at this point that it's more likely he's here than he's not, because that's how restricted free agency works, right? Like, I think it ultimately, someone like Colin is a bit of the victim of his circumstance, some bad luck. A relatively dry free agency marketplace, coming off a season-ending injury. And the I don't think anyone is operating in bad faith here. It's just a thing where Colin's like, I think I'm worth more, and the Cavs are like, we think when this is really all we think this is a fair offer for.
And plus the teams that get rumored as sign and trade, like teams that have interest in Sexton and sign and trade, it's like Dallas, who doesn't really have anything, Utah that doesn't really have anything if it's not Mitchell, Miami, where I just don't think that they have a lot of pieces outside of Tyler Herro. So it's
plus the Cavs are close to the tax line, so it's just, I think it's a spot where everyone's just in limbo, waiting on a reason that the circumstances will change.
Yep.
And why would if you're Colin Sexton, why not wait it out until you're closer to training camp? If you're the Cavs, why not wait it out until you're closer to training camp? See and see kind of who ends up feeling the need to blink first, because right now we're in the dog days. Nothing's happening. I don't see why either side would have any urgency to adjust what they value with regards to the deal. And that means that, in the interim, we're just gonna have to wait, just like Colin and the Cavs front office are having to wait.
And this actually ties into something I've been meaning to ask you, Brad, which is what's going on with John Collins? Because that's just like you are representing for Colin Sexton. I like John Collins a lot, and I'm lower on this Hawks team if he's not on it. So what's going on there? Because it seems like there was a lot of momentum and a lot of people saying that he's done. He's not going to play for the Hawks again. And then I see him with Trey and Dejounte and Pro-Ams just destroying the world.
Yeah, it's so strange. It's not quite as strange as Collins' situation because he's at least on the team and he's been signed long term and all that stuff. We can talk about him. But for the first time, I've kind of always been a skeptic that they would actually move Collins. He's been in rumors for like 2.5 years, basically straight. And usually I'm always like, all right, I'll kind of believe it when I see it. I'll hear some stuff and then I kind of downplay it. For the first time, and really the only time, it got to the point around the draft this year where I thought it was going to happen. I thought it was more likely than not, by a lot actually, that he was going to get moved between like late June and mid-July, and it just didn't happen. And at the end of it, I'm making calls and things, and it's like, by all accounts, he's very available, was very available the entire time, but it's so interesting because they don't seem to have lowered the price. And generally speaking, when a guy is as frequently tied to rumors as John Collins has been, there's an urgency on the team side to move that player. I think maybe the comp is like Miles Turner in Indiana, who's still also with the Pacers, and like they seem to just never move the price down for him. Like he's always available, but like they want what they want for him. And for Collins, by all accounts, it's like, yeah, they could move him, but they have always wanted real proper value for him. And they're asking for a lot. And I think they should, because to your point, Justin, like I've always been higher on Collins since about the second year in the league. Like early in his pre-drafts and stuff, I think defensively it was pretty ugly, and I think that's kind of stuck to him nationally. There's been this thought he's a bad defender. He's not a bad defender anymore. He's a pretty good defender. He's not Draymond, but he's a pretty good defender.
He also doesn't have to play center. Like the league got bigger again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I was with you 100%. Like that was my big draft concern with Collins, is that I thought he was going to be a center, and he's not been a center for the most part. And because of that, I worried about the defense. And now I don't really worry about that at all. He's a pretty complete player in a way that has been impressive. He's actually developed quite a bit. Like his jump shot's gotten a lot better. His pass has gotten a lot better defensively. But the thing with the Hawks now is that they're in this spot where ownership on down, and that's pretty publicly available. Ownership puts pressure on with the Murray trade, all that stuff. They wanted to maybe trade him, but if they were going to trade him, they wanted to replace him with a starting caliber power forward. So like you're number one, you're asking for full price. Number two, you also are basically setting it up to where any deal with Collins had to bring back a starting power forward because they want to win now. That's a pretty narrow pathway to look for a trade. Like, and at this point in late August, yeah, they could move him, but it's even more stark now. Like they're not going to move him without a power forward coming back. That they trust to be a starter. And like, who is that player in September? Like, I think he's going to be on the team if I had to guess. So
I just kind of don't understand. I haven't, I'm not privy to any, behind the scenes politics here, but the basketball fit seems pretty darn good. He can shoot. Yep. He's a great pick and roll lob finisher. He can play up tempo with Trey. He is flanked by either Capella or Okongwu, who help cover for his deficiencies with DeAndre Hunter, who also adds a lot of size on the wing when he's healthy. Like, why is there such an urgent need to divorce from this?
We are on the same page there, by the way. I've kind of never understood it either. When they got Capella, I thought it was fair, and I did this too. I talked about like at least questioning, okay, what's this offense going to look like with a complete non-shooter next to John Collins? Like, it's a pretty big, not the greatest spacing or like skilled offensive front court. Now, Collins is a really good offensive player, don't get me wrong, but his best skill after all of that is still his ability as a roll man. He's an awesome finisher, and he has not been able to do as much roll stuff as he has been previously with Capella and Okongwu because those guys can't shoot, and they basically have turned John Collins into, not all the way, but kind of a spot up role player, small role guy, which he's kind of overqualified for. But even then, all the numbers, if you look at it, like him and Capella have always worked. They've always been good when they play together. So even that question kind of went out the window for me. And yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with money. They've been very concerned with the salary cap and the luxury tax. I think maybe that was why they moved Kevin Huerter in the deal they moved Kevin Huerter to do. Maybe that sort of took a little bit of the energy off of the Collins stuff, because the only thing I possibly think of about wanting to move Collins is being fearful of the future salary stuff. That's the only thing that I can see. But even then, now with Huerter off the books, maybe it will come back up again with Murray getting paid presumably in 2 years if they want to keep him. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I've never kind of understood why they would be so urgent to do it. But again, they're still asking for a lot for him. So they clearly think a lot of him, but also not quite enough to make him untouchable. It's just very interesting. I don't know. It's odd.
It's definitely an interesting dynamic. I mean, he's not 7 feet tall, but he could play shooting guard for the Cavs if he ever wanted. If they were giving him away, I'm all in on the tall ball. We can get that going. But what is your next big question for the Cavs? Turning the tables back to us.
This is a pretty broad one, and I know you guys talk about this probably all the time. But like, I think one of the questions that I was doing some prep for some dime stuff, and I'm thinking like, what is the real version of the Cavs? Like, obviously there was some of the injury stuff last year that made it very clear as to why they faded a little bit, but the numbers early in the season were so jarringly impressive. Like, I remember, I'm sure you guys remember, like when they were like projected to win the East at 538 for a few weeks, and it was like, whoa, what's going on right now? Like, okay, so I guess the broad question, you can take it wherever you want, it is, which is closer to real, the first half, scalding hot top 2 or 3 seed Cavs, or what we talked about earlier with them maybe in a tier with the Hawks and then that like 6 to 8, 6 to 9 range?
I think that for me, I think what is real, I'm gonna slightly adjust the premise of your question and be real selfish and just answer the way I want to answer, which I think what is real are a few things on the positive end. I think the identity of the team was developed, defined, and is the reason they're going to succeed long term. So that identity is the Mobley Allen pairing on defense, and Darius, with the keys to the offense. And I think that especially that defensive identity, Justin has the stat. I think Darius, Evan, and Jarrett played how many games together, Justin?
They got 6 games together after January, and if you want to expand that to Lowry, Markkanen, they got 3 games together with those 4 that were kind of the consistent starters.
Yeah, so I feel like when you kind of pour through the lineup data, those are kind of the true consistents. Like, the defense was elite with Allen and Mobley on the floor. It was very not elite with either of them off the floor. The offense could really hum with Darius on the floor. Offense, especially after the Rubio injury, offense cratered when Darius was off the floor. I think those are kind of your repeatables. So to that end, like, I think their ceiling is as high as the first half of the season showed, but also to that end, the low end stuff is really real. Like, Karras wasn't good enough as a replacement secondary creator. The spacing writ large was not good enough. Lowry and Kevin, who both had really strong years, kind of tanked the defense when either of them was in at power forward. So I think the answer is yes. It was all real. It was all real, baby.
It was all real,
yes.
And we lived it all.
There you go.
Yeah, I think looking at the Cavs, I think if I had to pick one, and again, this is me playing my role as optimist, I would say the first half feels more real because, I mean, I think when you're
Because the players played.
Yeah, the players played, so that's obviously a big part of it. But I would also say just looking at the Eastern Conference improving and then just understanding what we talked about earlier, that growth isn't linear, and maybe some of the steps to becoming the team that you hope that they can be in the future and really kind of finding their ceilings individually and collectively, that might take some growing pains. If you're allowing Evan Mobley to initiate more offense and kind of letting him get some reps in roles he's not comfortable in, or comfortable in, but still has to adjust to doing that at an NBA level against competition that's going to be gunning for them. There may be games that, you lose as a result of that. That's very normal in the NBA developmental process. So I do think that there's going to be an adjustment period. If we're assuming that Karis LeVert's going to be starting at the 2, the second game that starting lineup is ever going to play together is going to be opening night. Like the first one was the game against the Hawks. Like they never got a chance to play together after the trade deadline. And I think that was a major disappointment, but I think there's going to be a period of time similar to the Hawks adjusting to Dejounte. There's going to be a period of time where they're adjusting to playing different styles and to have the depth that they have. I think I like the moves they made. I like having Howell Neto. Ricky Rubio, if he comes back later in the season, can give them a boost, but he's a good vet to have around. Robin Lopez gives them a legitimate backup center. They didn't really have that last year. So I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism, but I just have an understanding that this is going to be a really competitive Eastern Conference. There's a lot of teams that are going to be trying to win. I think the West has improved, and that obviously impacts what the regular season looks like. So I think it's closer to the start, but I would be surprised if All-Star Weekend comes around again this year and they're a half game out of first again. Like that would be a pretty awesome surprise, but I'm just not banking on it just yet.
That did feel pretty optimistic. And listen, it was fun. I mean, especially given where they were widely projected to be. I mean, I think people have almost forgotten how much they beat their preseason projections a year ago. I think we all knew that Mobley was going to be a great, potentially a great player, but no one had the Cavs doing anything like that. And
18 games over their over-under.
You're looking up in December and it's like, whoa, yeah. You don't often beat over-unders by 18 games. I think when the Hawks won 60, which you guys remember very well because of the way it ended.
Sorry.
I think the over-under that year was like 43.5. And that was, so they beat that by 16.5. That's less than the Cavs beat their over-under by last year. So that gives me a lot of comparison as to just how far they were above the baseline.
One question I do have for you, while we're on the subject of growth and kind of the path that it takes, the last big question I have for the Hawks is, what avenues do you see for them to go from where they're at now, which I think we agree kind of towards the upper parts of tier 2 with a chance to get into tier 1. What paths do you see to them taking that next step into actual title contention, whether that be through internal growth, free agency, a future trade? Obviously that's a little more complicated now that they gave up those picks. I'm just kind of curious what you think those next steps can be for the Hawks.
Yeah, the big thing internally is DeAndre Hunter, who we actually talked about earlier. I think kind of quietly, and look, I've always liked DeAndre. I think last year he really struggled, and I don't think people really noticed it outside of Atlanta because he had a really good first game against Luka on national TV. It was like a pretty big coming out party. And he had a really good last game, actually, in the playoffs against Miami, where I think he had like 30 points. It was kind of a rough year for him. And I think he's had a lot of injury issues. But if you look at this roster, he is the only guy at the 3. And I mean, Justin Holiday I like, but he's obviously a pure, rotational guy. And Hunter, being that they invested so much in him, former top 5 pick, he's really their X factor for me. Clearly, Trey and Dejounte are more important than he is. You kind of know what you're getting from Collins and Capella, but Hunter is the swing guy for me, especially for this year in particular. If there's a path for the Hawks to be a team that's a top 3 seed in the East, I think it almost certainly is accompanied by Hunter being pretty good at minimum, probably even better than that. And he's really the only guy internally, like at least in the present, at least a short term, that's a huge swing guy. Because Okongwu, who we all seem to love on this podcast, he's kind of blocked. Capella is there, and until they rectify that, and I think Capella's really good. I think when they drafted Okongwu, it was like, the plan was going to be maybe 2 years and then it's Kongwu's job. And Capella was so valuable that they just don't want to move away from him. And I get why. He's been awesome and Trey likes him and all that stuff. So
I got a spicy take, but before you continue, I'm going to derail with a spicy take.
Please do.
I think the Hawks lose that play-in game if Capella stays healthy that game, because I think Okongwu's kind of defensive versatility and the way he moves, just kind of the change of style mid-game, seemed to really throw the team off. Now, of course, there should have also been free throws there, and we can talk about that kind of stuff. But I think Okongwu made a really big difference in that game.
No, he's really, really good. And it's just the problem that, like, for him to actually really, really, really break out, Capella kind of has to not be there. They can't really play together for any length of time, etc. So, like, I still believe in Okongwu long term. I think at some point they're going to have to choose. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't happened already, but I also get why it hasn't happened already. But in terms of like the shorter term, I think Hunter's really the swing guy. Long term, it'd be great if they could hit on one of those picks between AJ Griffin and Jalen Johnson in the last 2 years in the first round. We've kind of seen very little from those guys so far. Griffin not playing summer league. Jalen was kind of just a non-factor last year for justifiable reasons, but we'll see what he looks like this year. And like you said, they gave up so many picks in the Murray trade. They have a couple they can still trade. They have this year's pick if they want to trade it. They actually left that one open to move if they wanted to move it for this year. But in terms of like super ceiling stuff, it's either a trade that we can't see coming or it's a super breakout from Hunter or Okongwu. Those are really the ways that I can see it happening because, you know, Collins is, for as good as we think he is, he's kind of the guy that we know he's going to be. I don't think he's going to change a whole lot. Capella saying
he's already grown a ton.
Yeah, he's already gotten a lot better, but he's got to be your third best player, fourth best player. He's not going to be number two. So, and now they have Murray. So we'll see how the Murray thing works. Maybe it's just better than we think it's going to be from step one. Maybe that's the biggest leap that they've already kind of made. We just haven't seen it yet. But in terms of like how it actually changes roster wise, it's Hunter for me in like big bold letters, and then there's other stuff on the margins. I think Okongwu, maybe there's a breakout in a year or two to where he like has, I mean, the famous comparisons Bam Adebayo. I don't want to put that on him. That's just super, super high end stuff because Bam's awesome. But like that kind of breakout for him maybe 2 years from now. But for this year, I really think it's Hunter as the swing guy, and it's kind of scary. He hasn't been great so far in his career, but I still believe in him as a prospect. So if it's kind of also now or never because he's going to be a free agent after this year. He's almost 25, so circle that one. He's the guy for me.
I mean, I'm always here for a great breakout. We benefited on the podcast a couple years ago from a breakout from our wonderful partner Zoom.
I knew you were going. That was telegraphed.
That was delightful. I love that. That was great.
You know, they surprised us and they've been reliable ever since. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. Carter, was it really that telegraphed?
Oh, I saw it coming a mile away. Because funny enough, I was getting
smirk.
I was just smirk. You had the smirk, and two, it was funny because I think we just connected cosmically because I was getting ready to Google chat you and be like, hey, don't forget the Zoom read. And then the second you start, I was like, he's doing it. He's doing it. Maybe it was on my brain, you know.
I wish I was better at ad read. I might take some notes from that. Justin, that was a good.
Justin is an elite ad reader and a great seguer. I will never actually deride it. I just happened to see that one coming.
Love it.
Thank you, Carter. Thank you. I appreciate the compliments, and I take great pride in trying to upset you with my ad reads. Brad, what's your last big question for the Cavs before we kind of wrap this thing up?
Yeah, the other one we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but I just want to talk about Evan Mobley for a minute. Not that that's a breaking news topic.
No.
But what's that look like in year two? Because it's interesting for me. I always find that guys who have great rookie seasons are sometimes a little bit overvalued for what they are in the present, not the future, in the present. Like, because most of the time rookies are not very good. Now, Mobley was actually the rare exception that actually was a legitimately positive player as a rookie. But I think if you polled like fans, like how good is he right now, they'd probably be a little bit higher than some people might have justified. But also, I've also loved him for a long time. I really believe in the breakouts. Like, what does Evan Mobley year two look like? Because like if the breakout really happens, that's maybe the way the Cavs make their big leap. I think Garland's kind of already done it to some extent. But if Mobley really breaks out, then we'll see.
Yeah, Carter, you want to take this first?
Oh, I was going to let you because I went first last time, but I'm happy to jump on it.
This is a layup. It's like you guys just wind up the Evan Mobley talk. Come on.
Honestly, we're guilty of not talking about Mobley enough, I think, sometimes. Well, like we absolutely love Mobley, but it's hard sometimes to like get to realistic expectations. So sometimes I fear talking about Mobley because it's so easy to go to hyperbole.
Well, it's funny for me. In fact, it kind of goes the inverse. You know, Brad, you kind of talked about it, like how, you know, I sometimes the perception of Mobley kind of might slightly exceed the reality. Jackson Frank did a really, really good write-up on Mobley and the analyst, and I thought it was really educational, I think, for, normally when a team has a rookie, the fan base goes bananas, and, you know, the larger NBA commentariat needs to, like, talk them down a little bit. I almost feel like sometimes my job is to do the inverse and explain and teach people, like, oh no, this is a really awesome player who has some legitimate limitations right now that that when he unlocks those, oh my goodness, it is just so over. I mean, so I think when you're looking at year 2 Mobley, a lot of it comes down to I personally don't anticipate a huge leap. I just think I think it's going to be improvement along the margins, and I think the big leap comes in year 3 when he's then got 2 years of NBA weight training and just straight up just getting older, just functional man strength. I still think strength is one of the things that limits him most, but it's not in the way people projected that it would in his pre-draft process, where everyone's like, okay, he's going to get put under the basket. I think his lack of strength impacts him most on offense, and Jackson did a really, really nice job breaking that down in his piece, where he has a hard time getting to his spots right now because these bigger, burlier guys just push him off. So when he gets deep duck-ins or he gets switches, he loves mashing switches. So he's not a physical player, but if he doesn't get to his spot first, he's not going to be able to push his way there, and that leads to him taking some tougher angles on his finishes. I think it also means he has to rely on his handle a little bit more, and his handle isn't quite in traffic good enough. So I just think those things getting 5% better turns him into a good for an NBA player, great for a rookie, to approaching a legitimately great NBA player, even heading into next year. But I think the super duper star leap happens in year 3, and this is not to deride Mobley's game, because he's amazing, and I'm so excited about him. But those are the things I see that he still needs to get better at to take that star leap.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and good shout on the Jackson Frank piece.
Love Jackson, co-worker of mine at Dime. Shout out to Jackson while we're here.
Very good people, another friend of the pod. I'm curious to see what I'd like to see from Mobley this year. Like Carter said, is growth within the margins, but I really am curious if we can get a little bit of playmaking juice from him. Let's see what he can do from the high post, what he can do if the jumper is a little bit better. I mean, a lot of the kind of video looks like the motion is a lot smoother, that he's got that high release point, and he hit some really kind of impressive mid-range shots as a self-creator at times last year. But the percentages weren't great, but the flashes were really, really encouraging. He has that KG turnaround from 18 feet that was really exciting to see when he used it. So I'm curious to see what it looks like there. I don't predict maybe a massive statistical leap, but if he can do a little bit of that, especially if they continue to do what they did last year, which was Mobley comes out first and ends up functionally playing the backup center role, I think there's a real opportunity for him in those minutes to kind of display some playmaking chops. And if he does that and you're able to run some offense through him with other guys on the court, whether it's Karis LeVert, Colin Sexton, or other guys that can thrive on and off ball, I really do think that can give the Cavs a level of offensive consistency that they didn't necessarily have for the majority of last year. Where are you at with Mobley? What do you think next season could bring for him?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is, you guys talked about the functional strength is what maybe unlocks him to be the best defender in the league eventually, something like that. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but you know what I mean?
It's definitely going to happen. Don't shy away,
buddy. You don't need to hedge. You don't need to hedge here.
I know that. I know that's a ceiling, and that I do buy that. I've always been high on him anyway. But if there is some sort of drawback for me. It's like, can he self-create offensively at a high enough level to be like the guy level? But like, if he doesn't get to that, that's not the biggest deal in the world. I think the skill level was already super far ahead of where people thought it might be as a rookie too. So, and the fit obviously worked really well. Like, I was definitely hand up a skeptic of the Mobley Allen fit coming into last year. And like, it obviously worked. Like, it's not necessarily the most modern approach in terms of like small ball stuff, but like you said earlier, the league's getting a little bit bigger in some respects, and they work very well. The jump shot could solidify, but other than that, like, I don't know. I really, there aren't a lot of weaknesses there. Like, certainly that's part of the appeal of Mobley, is that he's just so well rounded. Like, if he gets bigger, and I almost certainly will, how much bigger and stronger, as long as he can keep that functional athleticism and that sort of smoothness that he has. I don't know. He's terrifying, and he definitely plays to the stuff that I love. Like, I'm a sucker for role players in defense. Like, my podcast listeners probably hate how much I like defense and how much I value role players. And Mobley's like the superest version of that. And he's not a role player necessarily, but you know what I mean? Like, he checks like so many of those boxes that I'm just prone to loving. So I'm an Evan Mobley guy.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I always make the Duncan comparison with him. It's my particularly favorite comp, because I just think very rarely have I ever seen a rookie be able to put up like 16 and 9 and completely own, entire stretches of games. It's not like, especially in Justin loves to call it the juiced ball era, where you can get a ton of, you can really rack up numbers if you play a certain style. There aren't a lot of these, just impact merchants, that are just that's what they do, I don't know if Mobley's ever going to be a 25, 26 point per game player, which I think really speaks to how highly we all value everything else he does, that we're like, yeah, he could still be like the best player in the league. Like, at 22 points a game. Like, no, how many players can you say that about? I don't think very many at all.
Not many. And I remember, like, we were trying to temper expectations going into last year. And then I think when we came down for opening weekend and the Cavs played the Hawks, and Evan Mobley switches onto Trae Young effortlessly and doesn't draw, like, Trae's not able to draw a foul on him. He's not able to get by him. And Mobley just bothered the hell out of him. We're like, okay, now this is something special. This is a little wild on opening weekend of your rookie season. Brad, before we get you out of here, let's get your bold prediction. Who finishes higher in the regular season, Hawks or Cavs?
Are you trying to get me run off your podcast? Like, this is one of those things.
Some group is going to be mad at you. One side or the other. I was going
to say, no, I'm actually known for not being a homer, and Hawks fans would love me to be more of a homer, so they're going to like this. I'll say the Hawks. I do like the Hawks a little bit more than the Cavs this year. Like I said before, I do like both teams more than the Bulls. That's by a lot. I think that's a pretty clear one, but I will say Hawks over Cavs, and people will yell at me, but that's okay. I'd rather have them yell at me than yell at you, because they only see me once a year, or
that's
if
nice.
that. So
that's nice. Okay. I mean, we've seen the Hawks finish higher in the regular season, and then the playoffs are a different thing with the Cavs. So I hope history repeats itself a little bit, and we can bother each other along the way.
that did happen quite a bit. Fortunately for the Hawks, that LeBron guy is not anywhere to be found on the Cleveland side. And famously, last year the Cavs had a better record than the Hawks, even with their late swoon. They had a one game lead on the Hawks, and then the play-in flipped it. But
it's fine. Our new generational talent will torture Hawks fans for decades to come.
Listen, that might happen at some point. But no, I do buy the Cavs. I think they're pretty good. That's a fun team, and we'll see how it all works. But I have to stay true to myself, and not even being a homer. That actually maybe gives me more credibility when I say this. I think you guys like the Hawks too. From this conversation, I feel like you guys are pretty high on the Hawks. So compared to the consensus anyway. So
that's the one thing that I found. Like, we did one of these with the Raptors, and now we've done it with the Hawks. Like, I just like too many teams around the league. Like, I'm going to force the rivalries here, but I do like and respect
like basketball.
The Hawks. Yeah, I kind of just like basketball.
So
Justin's a fraud. He hates Toronto.
I like Toronto players. Their fans ruin them for me.
That's very nice.
I almost said that because I had this thought somewhere in my mind. Doesn't he not like Toronto? I couldn't remember, doesn't. But okay.
He gets worked up. He gets texts from his dad complaining about the refs, and then he complains to me about his dad complaining about the refs. He doesn't like the Raptors. This liar.
I like their players. Their fans are just talented. They managed to get me to a place where I don't like them. But Brad, before I wrap this up, do you have anything you want to let people know that you got coming up?
Just the Locked On Hawks podcast is my Hawks spot. If you are not interested in the Hawks, which probably a lot of your listeners are not, I do write about the league at Dime on Uproxx, which we mentioned earlier, and also occasionally at Sportsline, but mostly Dime on the written side. And I will cover the Cavs at some point.
Shout out Dime.
I see that in the background. Shouts to Dime. So that's my one national spot. So check that out for sure.
We had a good time with some of the Dime boys on All-Star Weekend. So shout out to all you guys. You do fantastic work there. And big shout out to our listeners as well. We appreciate you guys sticking with us throughout the offseason. Training camp's coming here soon. I could not be more excited. Shout out to everyone on the YouTube. If you want to support us, like, subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, you can send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. And until next time, go Cavs.